Hello, welcome. Today's topic is the strategy of a campaign, and it's the start of module number 2. Watch a politician giving their speech, and it seems like a heartfelt speech where they're presenting their political project for the city and telling the people, the audience, to hold them accountable after they're elected. There's a warning to be made in this case, folks. Let's talk a bit about their behavior. The politician is very predictable. He always says the same thing all the time and for everyone to hear. So in this case, the importance lies in doing things fundamentally different from the old politics. That's very interesting. Also, their speeches about their projects are often more like statements of intent. Without an executive character, that's a complication, folks. You have to pay a lot of attention to how to plan a project. The politician's concern is often about staying in power, to get re-elected or to elect their successor. Some of them act like self-made men, thinking they know everything, and they get buried in the depths of court orders. All of this is due to a lack of skill in dealing with administrative matters. Now we're going to see and really talk about the planning of a campaign. The planning of a campaign spans 4 years. When an election ends, it's already looking towards the next election 4 years later for the same elected position. And that's the importance of the 4 years of a campaign. And the goals, the objectives, in the pre-election phase are in the planning, in winning over voters in neighborhoods, villages and cities, and also in the expectation of how to create a government plan. So that's how you establish the planning of the government itself. The global objectives are related to the regional aspect. So it's the surroundings, what we have around a state. We have cities, we have states that are called regions. Let's say regions. And Wikipedia, which is the free encyclopedia, shows how the regions are divided in Brazil. We have, for example, the macro regions. We have the mesoregions and the micro regions. We'll talk a bit more about that later, folks. So we set goals mainly for those who are running for state deputy, federal deputy, and governor. We just talked about planning and goals, but on a micro level, how to win over and how many voters to win over. What's the best approach? How are we going to get closer, show ourselves, and make ourselves available to the voter? There's the big secret. Let's not hide. So the approach to the voter is to understand their priorities regarding their demands and problems. Speaking of understanding the needs and problems of a neighborhood, region, or city, it's hard to do that without a working mechanism to identify them, because there are a lot of people who have problems, have priorities, and this can only be done through microinformatics. In other words, work with apps. In the neighborhoods, in the villages, identifying the demands, the needs of the voters. This aspect is very important, folks. Now we're going to see what the off-season period is. We mentioned the political campaign lasts 4 years. So the off-season period can be 2, 3, or 4 years for the election. It's the fertile period for winning over voters, where they are open to dialogue, and we can approach them without that last-minute pressure. So that's really interesting. And it's the process, you see, it's the 4 years of winning over, right? Then we have the 5 stages: the planning, how to develop the organization, the political strategy, and we have the daytime mouth. Let's talk about the day before the elections. The daytime mouth is actually the day before the elections. It's 3 months before the elections. All of this, folks, we notice that Some candidates wait to work on their political strategy until 6 months before the elections or 3 months before the elections, when voters are being pressured and they don't want to be bothered. So it becomes hard to win them over there. It's more of a stolen vote than an earned vote that you're going to get. Now we're going to look at a graph that illustrates the level of voter dissatisfaction. The greater the level of dissatisfaction, you will notice, is among those who will work close to the elections. It becomes hard to even reach the goal they want to achieve. But if someone starts right at the beginning, when one election ends, aiming for the next one, they have a smaller angle, and their effort is less to reach the goal. And in politics, folks, goals are often vague. So the voter gets frustrated because they don't see the fulfillment of what they asked for, their demands. So the goals are vague and often lead to unconfessable, hidden, misleading policies, folks. On the other hand, vague goals in politics are interesting products in political agreements. There's a low probability of going against the interests of others. So, you're good with everyone. Let's say politically correct. Now let's look at the types of candidates we have. That brand new candidate who's just starting out, the rookie, if he starts his campaign and his groundwork early in the regions to win over voters, he will be able to reach his goal in 4 years. Now the veteran is ahead. Why does the veteran get ahead? Because he has already been elected. And he has to put in less effort to maintain his established voter base and achieve a higher level of other accomplishments. Now the parachutist is that last-minute candidate. He doesn't even know why he's a candidate. He kept deciding not to decide, and at the last minute he launched his candidacy, thinking he could get elected just like that, as if by magic. Let's now look at the process of winning over. The communication between voters and politicians exists. Both are sharing goals, targets to be presented. The voter always has a reaction like a bit of skepticism towards the politician. That's pejorative. And as time goes by, he sees that what the politician promised isn't happening. So he starts to feel anxiety, surprise, reaction, indignation. It's also an explosion, but it's already at that point. The disappointment and discouragement. So what happens in this case, folks? Let's take a look at the next slide. The empty space is the total number of votes that are not cast for candidates, like blank votes, undecided votes, null votes, and also absences. Besides being an empty space, there's also the party list vote. So often, the empty space can reach to 30% of the total valid votes. So folks, we need to be very careful and make sure we cast our votes wisely, right? Now, votes not won. Voters not won. That's when the voter gets upset and ends up not voting for a candidate by name. So we really need to be careful about that. To avoid this, the candidate needs to take very good care of their stronghold, not to be absent and leave room for threats from other opponents to steal their popularity in that area. So you see, this is all part of a fight against political illiteracy. We need to make voters aware of how they should cast their votes, folks. So this part about empty votes is really important because the voter sees that the candidate doesn't show up, doesn't present themselves, isn't available, and is absent. They have to be present, and this is part of good personal politics. He has to be present. And this is a part of good personal politics. Now let's see how to plan a campaign for a legislative position. Take a good look. You have the 2018 elections, we have the 2020 elections. So, we're going to have a roadmap here on how to work on planning a campaign for a legislative position. Winning over voters in cities, neighborhoods, and villages in the region. See how many voters to win over, how many voters to keep. Setting up campaign committees and identifying the party action hubs. That's also important. We need to see that the party fund has arrived and work with that money to help plan investments, folks. How many voters did you win over and how many did you keep? We just talked about that a little while ago. That's a very important point. Recruiting co-religionists and supporters of the candidate for the work of winning over voters. We need to see the opportunity in every person who's close to us. What work can she do to boost achievements? Assigning roles and responsibilities to each person. People with immediate and proven potential to perform their activities and tasks well. Voter registration and identifying priorities in the neighborhoods. Identifying voters who have the profile and qualifications for work on the eve of the election. Now, continuing. Contact with the government representative assigned to the region. In this case, we're talking about a candidate aiming for a position as a federal deputy or a state deputy. This is going to be very important. Include the region's goals, the government platform. Know the goals of the mayors in each city in the region. You need to be familiar with it, that little coffee with the mayors in the region, folks. Remember what we talked about, huh? The region, macro-region, micro-region, and meso-region. Look for the city leaders who identify the most with your goals. Increase the number of face-to-face and word-of-mouth appearances. That's also important. Get close to the press advisors in the cities. That's what it is, folks. The candidate needs to surround themselves with IT advisors, legal advisors, know about legal topics, and field advisors. That's where he has most people working in mining in the regions. Form the state and federal duo, because 2 batteries work better than 1. The schedule. Planning meetings be weekly or bi-weekly. And we will gather information from the voters in each city about the candidate's integrity and plans. We need to be familiar with what the candidate's goals and objectives are. The candidate's contacts with the mayors in the region, very important. Establish a slogan for your campaign. That's eye-catching. It's part of the campaign, right? The voter votes based on what they see, what they feel. And what he sees, folks, is behind the advertising. Knowledge about the region's goals for the area and the progress of the work. Could follow up. Everything is very well recorded, formatted, and technology is applied. Winning campaigns. Here's a very interesting point. Why do we have candidates who have 10, 15 times more votes than they need to get elected? And others can't get anything, folks. Here's a point I'd like to make. In some cities like Rio de Janeiro, people manage to get more votes than needed, but we won't name them for ethical reasons. Pay attention, follow successful candidates, and keep track. We discussed winning and maintaining voters, breaking the mold of old politics. We also talked about the off-season and the parachute candidate who appears 2 months before the election, wanting to get elected. But pay close attention. Follow the successful candidates. Keep following them. All right, folks, we'll stop here. We talked about a lot of things, and we also discussed how to win and maintain voters. We talked about breaking the mold, doing things fundamentally different from the old politics. We talked about the off-season period, and we talked about that parachute candidate who only shows up at the end, folks, 2 months before the election, wanting to get elected, as if by magic. So we really need to evaluate that carefully. And we also talked about empty space. So we really need to evaluate that carefully. And we also talked about empty space. Now, if you are satisfied, great. Otherwise, come back to us. Let's talk. Let's assess what is most needed. The handouts have detailed and interesting material for you in this follow-up, folks. I would like you to always be close to us. The topic of the next class is arguments in winning over voters. Thank you very much for your attention. A hug.